The world exploded around Drew in a symphony of breaking metal and screaming alarms. His shuttle tore through the alien atmosphere like a dying star, spinning wildly as gravity pulled it toward the unknown planet below. The control panel sparked and hissed, throwing wild shadows across his terrified face as he fought desperately with the controls. "Come on, come on," he shouted over the deafening noise, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. But the ship wouldn't listen. It had already given up, surrendering to the planet's pull like a wounded bird falling from the sky. The impact was brutal and unforgiving. Drew's world went black for a moment as his head snapped forward, then back. When consciousness crawled back to him, everything hurt. His vision blurred and cleared again. The cockpit around him looked like a war zone. Sparks danced from broken screens like angry fireflies. Wires hung loose like dead snakes. The air tasted of burning metal and smoke. Drew coughed hard, his lungs burning. Each breath felt like swallowing fire. His whole body screamed in pain, especially his left side where something sharp stabbed at him with every movement. Broken ribs, definitely, maybe more than one, but he was alive, and right now, that was all that mattered. His hands shook as he reached for the harness release. The button was slick with sweat and maybe blood. He couldn't tell in the flickering light. The straps fought him at first, stuck and twisted, but finally gave way with a loud snap that echoed through the broken ship. Drew groaned as he forced himself to move. Every muscle protested, every joint ached, but staying in the shuttle meant death. He could smell fuel leaking somewhere, and sparks were still flying. It was only a matter of time before something caught fire. His emergency pack hung on the wall nearby, somehow still in one piece. Drew grabbed it with trembling fingers, slinging the heavy bag over his shoulder. The weight made his injured ribs shriek, but he gritted his teeth and pushed forward. The exit hatch was his next challenge. The metal door hung crooked in its frame, clearly damaged in the crash. Drew pushed against it with his shoulder, then harder with both hands. Nothing. Panic started to creep up his throat. What if he was trapped? What if this broken shuttle became his tomb? "No," he said out loud, his voice hoarse but determined, "not today." Drew threw his whole body against the hatch. Once, twice, 3 times, on the 4th try, something gave way with a grinding screech of twisted metal. The door swung open, and suddenly he was falling forward into cool, sweet air. He hit the ground hard, landing on his hands and knees. For a long moment, he just stayed there, breathing. The air here was different, cleaner somehow, with a strange sweetness that made his head spin slightly. But it was air, and it was free, and he was alive. Slowly, Drew lifted his head and looked around. What he saw made him forget all about his pain for a moment. The sky above him wasn't blue. It swirled with soft colors, purple like fresh bruises, orange like sunset, pink like cotton candy. 2 suns hung low on the horizon, one slightly larger than the other, both casting long, strange shadows across the landscape. The ground beneath him wasn't dirt or grass. It felt soft and spongy, like walking on a giant mattress. When he pressed his hand down, it glowed faintly, as if his touch woke up tiny lights sleeping just under the surface. The whole world seemed to shimmer and pulse with hidden energy. Trees surrounded him, but they weren't like any trees from Earth. These giants stretched up toward the colorful sky, their trunks clear as glass. Inside each trunk, rivers of light flowed like glowing blood, pulsing slowly up and down. Their leaves were enormous, big as bed sheets, and they changed color as gentle breezes moved through them, now blue, now green, now silver. Pools of liquid light dotted the forest floor like scattered mirrors. Their surfaces rippled without any wind, sending waves of color dancing across the tree trunks. The whole place felt alive, watching, waiting. Drew pushed himself to his feet, wincing as his ribs reminded him they were broken. He turned back to look at his shuttle. Half of it had disappeared into the spongy ground, as if the planet was slowly swallowing it. Smoke still rose from the wreckage like incense. The ship would never fly again. He didn't need to be a mechanic to know that much. "Well," he said to no one, his voice sounding small in the vast, quiet forest, "this is just perfect. How had it all gone so wrong so fast? Just this morning, was it still the same day? Time felt strange here. He had been part of something important." The exploration fleet, they called it. Dozens of ships sent out to find new worlds where humans could live. New homes among the stars. His job was simple. Fly out to the edge of known space, scan planets, take pictures, send reports back home. Nothing dangerous, nothing exciting, just routine work, or so they had told him, but then the solar flare hit. A wall of energy from a nearby star, invisible but deadly to ship systems. One moment his instruments were working perfectly. The next, everything was dead or dying. His ship had been thrown off course like a toy, spinning helplessly toward this unknown world. He had tried to send a distress signal, but the communication system was fried. For all anyone knew, Drew had simply vanished into the void. No one was coming to look for him. No one even knew where to look. The thought hit him like a punch to the gut. He was alone, completely, utterly alone on an alien world with no way home and no way to call for help. Drew shook his head hard, trying to push away the fear that threatened to swallow him whole. Panic wouldn't help. Despair wouldn't fix his ship or fill his belly. He needed to think like a survivor, not like a victim. First things first, shelter. Then water, food, and maybe, if he was very lucky, some way to repair his communication system, or at least send out a signal that someone somewhere might hear. Looking around, Drew spotted something promising. Beyond the glowing forest, a cliff face rose up like a stone wall. Its surface was rough and broken, full of cracks and shadows, and there, about halfway up, he could see what looked like a dark opening. A cave. It wasn't much, but it was better than sleeping in the open. At least in a cave he would have walls around him and a roof over his head. He could defend it if he needed to, and maybe, if he was really lucky, it would be dry. Drew adjusted his emergency pack, trying to find a position that didn't make his ribs scream. Then he started walking toward the cliff, his boots making soft, squelching sounds against the glowing ground. The forest was eerily quiet as he walked. No birds sang, no insects buzzed, no small animals rustled through the undergrowth. The only sound was a low, steady humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It made the hair on his arms stand up and sent shivers down his spine. The silence felt wrong somehow. Back on Earth, forests were full of life and noise. Here it was as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Drew had made it about halfway to the cliff when he heard it, a sound that made him freeze in his tracks, his hand moving instinctively to the knife on his belt. It was soft and rhythmic, like someone crying, but not quite human. The sound rose and fell like a sad song, full of pain and fear. Drew crouched behind a cluster of glowing plants, his heart hammering in his chest. He wasn't alone on this world after all. But was that good news or bad news? The crying didn't sound threatening, but then again, he had no idea what kinds of creatures lived on this strange planet. The sound was coming from the direction of the cave. Drew crept forward carefully, using the giant glowing trees as cover. As he got closer, the crying became clearer. It wasn't just one voice. There were at least two, maybe three, all soft and sad and scared. At the mouth of the cave, Drew hid behind a wall of luminescent plants that pulsed with blue-green light. He pushed aside some of the glowing leaves and peered inside. What he saw made him gasp. The cave was beautiful in a way that took his breath away. The walls weren't rough stone but smooth surfaces that gleamed like liquid silver. Light flowed across them in slow waves, casting dancing shadows that made the whole space feel alive and magical. But it wasn't the cave that made Drew stare. It was the family huddled in the center of it. A woman sat with her back against the cave wall, holding two small children in her arms. At first glance, they looked almost human. But as Drew's eyes adjusted to the soft light, he could see the differences. Their skin had a faint blue tint like moonlight on water. Their hair was long and golden, but it seemed to glow with its own inner light, flowing and shimmering like liquid sunshine. The woman was tall and slender, with delicate features that seemed almost too perfect to be real, but it was their eyes that really set them apart. Large and almond-shaped, they glowed softly in the dim cave, like stars reflected in still water. Beautiful, but definitely not human. The woman was clearly exhausted. She trembled as she held her children, and Drew could see strange, iridescent patterns along her skin that pulsed weakly, as if she was running out of energy. The two little girls, they were definitely girls, despite their alien features, clung to their mother with the desperate grip of children who had been scared for far too long. All three of them looked like they hadn't eaten or slept properly in days. Their clothes, made of some shimmering material Drew didn't recognize, were torn and dirty. The woman's eyes darted constantly toward the cave entrance, as if she expected danger to come walking in at any moment. When those glowing eyes suddenly locked onto Drew's hiding spot, he felt his heart stop. The woman stiffened like a startled deer, pulling her children closer. She hissed something in a language that sounded like music and wind chimes, but her tone was pure warning. "Stay away, don't come any closer, don't hurt my babies." Drew realized he was still crouched behind the plants like some kind of stalker. That probably wasn't helping his case. Slowly, carefully, he raised one hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "Hey," he said softly, trying to make his voice as non-threatening as possible. "I'm not here to hurt you, I promise." The smaller of the two girls turned to look at him with curious eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. When she spoke, her voice was like silver bells, but the words were perfectly clear. "Are you one of them?" she asked. Drew frowned, confused. One of who? The mother hissed again, sharp and angry, and the little girl fell silent. But her eyes never left Drew's face, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "I don't know who you think I am," Drew said, still speaking softly, "but I'm just a guy who crashed his ship trying to get here. I don't even know what this place is called." The older girl, who looked to be maybe 8 or 9 in human years, leaned close to her mother's ear. She whispered something in their musical language, but Drew caught a few words that sounded almost like English. The mother's grip on her children loosened slightly, but her expression remained wary and distrustful. When she spoke, her words were accented but clear. "Why are you here?" she demanded. "What do you want from us?" "Understandable, an accident," Drew said. "My ship went down. I didn't mean to come here. And I don't want trouble, I just need shelter." He gestured toward the cave. "You need help. I can see that. Let me help you." The woman hesitated, her eyes flicked to her daughters, then back to Drew. "If you harm them, I won't," Drew said firmly. The younger girl, still watching him intently, spoke again. "Do you know how to fix ships?" "Mother's ship is broken, Lyra," the woman said sharply enough. We drew glance between them, piecing together fragments of the situation. They were stranded just like him. The mother's exhaustion, children's frailty, the makeshift bedding of glowing moss in the corner, it all pointed to weeks, maybe months of struggle. He crouched slowly, setting his pack on the ground. "I'll stay back," he said, "but I can give you food and water. It's safe." The woman studied him for a long moment, then gave a reluctant nod. Drew unpacked a few energy bars in his water filter, sliding them across the ground. She took them cautiously, her hands trembling. The children watched with wide, unblinking eyes as they ate. Drew stayed quiet, letting them grow accustomed to his presence. He caught the older girl, Ella, sneaking glances at him. The younger one, who hadn't spoken yet, clung to her mother, but seemed less frightened now. "What your name?" Lyra asked suddenly. "Drew," he said. "And you?" She hesitated, then said, "Lyra." "My sister's call a mother is Tell." Taya shot her daughter a reproachful look, but didn't scold her. Instead, she turned her attention back to Drew. "If you stay," she said slowly, "you must understand this place is not safe." Drew nodded. I gathered that. Tay's eyes darkened. "There are others not like you, not like us. They hunt." We felt a chill creep up his spine. He didn't know who or what these hunters were, but he Had a feeling he'd find out soon enough for now, though survival came first. Whatever this family had been through, he was determined to help them, and maybe in helping them he could save himself too. Drew sat cross-legged on the cool spongy ground just inside the cave, sharpening his knife against a smooth obsidian stone he'd found near the stream. His muscles etched from the crash, his ribs throbbed with each breath, but he ignored the discomfort. The rhythmic scrape of metal on stone grounded him, helping to quiet the questions racing through his mind. Behind him, the soft rustle of movement caught his attention. Lyra and Kala peeked around their mother, who remained seated against the far wall. Tayla's watchful eyes never left him, her posture still tense despite her children's growing curiosity. "You're fixing your weapon," Ilare said, suddenly stepping forward a little. Her golden hair shimmered faintly in the low light of the cave. "Why, it's not just a weapon," Drew replied, holding up the blade. "It's a tool you can cut, would prepare food, or defend yourself with it." Lyra tilted her head, intrigued. "Our people don't use tools like that. We shape things." She waved a small hand mimicking emotion, and her eyes glimmered faintly as if recalling something lost. Tayer spoke sharply, her voice a low lilting reprim. "And enough." Ilare let him work. Lyra frowned, but stepped back reluctantly. Kala, quieter and more reserved, clung to her sister's arm. Drew caught the fleeting expression of disappointment on her small blue face. "They're curious," Drew said, glancing at Tayer. "I get it. This is as strange to them as all of this is to me." "You carry danger with you," Tyler replied evenly. "They should not be curious. I'd rather they understand than fear," he countered, his tone calm. "But firm fear makes mistakes." Taylor narrowed her eyes, clearly skeptical, but she said nothing. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Drew took a breath and decided to break it. "Why are you hiding here?" he asked, turning the blade in his hands as if the question were casual. "You said there are hunters. What are they? Animals? Other beings? Something else?" Tell hesitated, her gaze flicking to her daughters. Lyra and Kella both looked up at her expectantly, as if waiting for permission to speak. "They are machines," Tully said finally. Her voice wavered, but she steadied it quickly. "Remnants of war. They were built to destroy, but now they hunt anything that glows. Our light draws them." "Machines," Drew repeated, his brow furrowing. "Autonomous. They were designed to follow commands," Tala explained, "but the ones here are broken. Their purpose is corrupted. Sense life as an enemy. We are prey to them." Drew absorbed this, his mind spinning with possibilities. War, remnants, shint machines, a planet where glowing beings like Tala and her daughters were seen as targets. It explained the cave and the careful way she moved, always staying close to the shadows. "Why not leave the cave?" he asked. "Find a safer place." Tila gave a bitter laugh, the sound sharp and startling in the quiet. "There is no safe place. The forest hides us, but the light of the stars above will betray us if we go too far." Drew leaned back, considering her words. It made sense now why she was so guarded, why her daughters had seemed so frail. They were prisoners in their own home, hunted by creations meant for war. Lyra broke the heavy silence, her voice soft. "Do humans have war too?" Question caught Drew off guard. He paused, the knife slipping slightly in his grip. "Yes," he admitted after a moment. "More than I'd like to say." "Do you fight in them?" she asked, her wide glowing eyes fixed on him. Drew hesitated, then shook his head. "I study, explore, try to understand things. But I've seen war. It leaves scars no one can heal." Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line, and she looked away. Collar reached for her hand, clasping it tightly. The quiet gesture made Drew's chest ache in a way he didn't expect. "You came here to study," Ta said suddenly, her voice cold. "And now you're stranded. Do you intend to use us for your studies too?" Her words hit like a slap. Drew set the knife and stone aside, meeting her gaze. "I'm not here to hurt anyone, Ta. I didn't choose to crash on this planet, but now that I'm here, I'll do whatever I can to help." Her expression remained skeptical, but her shoulders relaxed slightly. "We'll see," she said. "Words mean little. I'll prove it." Then Drew replied. The conversation ended there. But Drew's mind kept turning long after. Machines that hunted light, a mother and her children forced into hiding, and his own broken ship now useless except as a marker of his failure. He stood and slung his pack over his shoulder. "I'm going to find water," he said, his voice steady. "You'll need more than what you have here." Tayer raised an eyebrow. "You think it's that simple?" "I'll find a way," he said, stepping toward the entrance. "Stay here. Yauk, draw them," she warned the machines. "I'll keep to the shadows," he said, glancing back at her. "And I'm not glowing, remember." Lyra smiled faintly at that, but Tay's expression remained wary. She said nothing as he slipped out of the cave, disappearing into the luminous forest. The forest was alive in a way Drew had never seen before. The ground pulsed faintly under His boots and the air felt charged as if the planet itself was alive. He moved carefully, avoiding the larger pools of glowing liquid, and sticking close to the thicker trees, he found the stream not far from the cave, its water crystal clear and cool to the touch. Drew crouched, filling his filter and watching the forest for movement. His instincts told him he wasn't alone, though he hadn't seen anything. Yet the hum came first, a low vibrating sound that seemed to resonate in his bones. Drew froze his hand, going to his knife. From the shadows of the trees, something emerged, a sleek metallic shape. Its body segmented like an insect's, but moving with the precision of a machine. Its head swiveled, and Drew saw its glowing red eyes scanning the forest. He held his breath, pressing himself against the base of a tree. The machine moved closer, its footsteps surprisingly quiet for something so large. It paused at the edge of the stream, lowering its head, as if sniffing the air. Then it turned sharply. Red eyes locking onto the path Drew had taken. His heart raced as the machine began moving toward the cave. Drew ran. He kept low, his boots barely making a sound as he darted between trees. His mind raced. If the machine reached the cave, Taylor and the girls didn't stand a chance. He reached the cave just ahead of it, sliding inside and grabbing the largest rock he could lift. Taylor's eyes widened as he gestured for her to stay quiet. "What machine?" he whispered harshly. "It's coming." She pulled the girls to her, her body shielding them as Drew positioned himself at the entrance. The hum grew louder, vibrating the air. Drew gripped the rock tightly, his jaw clenched. The machine's metallic body appeared at the entrance, its red eyes scanning the cave. Drew hurled the rock with all his strength, hitting it square in the head. The machine recoiled, sparks flying, but it didn't retreat back. Drew shouted, grabbing another rock. The machine lunged, and Drew swung with everything he had. The impact sent vibrations up his arms, but the machine staggered, its movements jerky. Now Taylor stood, then her voice cutting through the chaos. "Enough, come inside." Drew barely had time to register her words before a soft glow spread from her hands, enveloping the cave. The machine froze, its body trembling. Before it collapsed, lifeless, Drew stared, breathing hard. What was that teased glow? Faded, her expression unreadable. "A reminder," she said softly. "Not everything is as it seems." He sank to the ground, his mind reeling. There was more to this family and this planet than he'd realized. The cave was silent, except for the occasional drip of water from the luminous moss lining its walls. Drew leaned against the rocky entrance, the knife in his hand, catching faint glimmers of light, his body etched from days of vigilance and labor. But it was the unrelenting tension that wore him down the most. Outside, the forest pulsed faintly, its bioluminescent glow creating an eerie twilight that never truly faded. It was beautiful, but beauty on this planet always came with a price. Ta sat by the girls, her golden hair catching the soft light like strands of molten metal. Lyra and Kala huddled close to her, their faintly glowing skin illuminating the moss beneath them. Drew could feel Tyler's gaze on him, sharp and distrustful. Even as she gently stroked Kala's head to soothe the child. "They asleep," Ta murmured after a while, her voice low and melodic. Finally Drew turned, his eyes meeting hers. "They're tougher than you give them credit for. They shouldn't have to be," she replied, her tone heavy with regret. "Children are not meant for this life." Drew crouched down, resting his arms on his knees. "You've kept them alive. That's more than most could do in your position." Taya's lips pressed into a thin line. "Barely every day is borrowed time, and when the machines find us, they won't." Drew cut in, his voice firm. "Not if we're ready." Taylor scoffed, her distrust palpable. "Your snares and stones, they won't stop what's coming. They'll buy us time." Drew said, his jaw tightened. "In time to come up with something better, time to figure out what those things want, and how to keep them away." Her silence felt like an unspoken challenge. Drew stood, running a hand through his hair, and turned toward the forest. "I'll check the perimeter, make sure the traps are holding. You're wasting your energy," she said. But there was no venom in her tone this time. "Just weariness, a soul maybe," he replied, stepping out into the glowing forest. "But it's better than waiting to die." The traps were crude but effective. Drew had spent hours with Elleray, weaving vines and sharpening stones into rudimentary snares and spikes. The first few traps near the stream were intact. He crouched by one of the snares, tightening the knots and testing the tension. Satisfied, he moved deeper into the forest, his senses sharp for any sign of movement. The hum started faintly, so low it was almost imperceptible. Drew froze, his hand gripping the hilt of his knife. The sound grew louder, vibrating in his chest like the distant rumble of an approaching storm. He turned toward the noise, his eyes scanning the glowing foliage. A red light flickered between the trees, moving with unnatural precision. Drew's heart pounded as the light drew closer, accompanied by the whing of servos and the sharp clicks of metal limbs. He ducked behind a large glowing tree, holding his breath. The machine came into view. It was smaller than the last one, its insect-like body sleek and angular, its head swiveled, scanning the area with an unsettling red eye. Drew watched as it approached one of the snares, its spindly legs moving with eerie fluidity. The trap snapped, the vine tightening around its limb. The machine jerked back, a metallic screech cutting through the air. Drew didn't wait. He lunged from his hiding spot, his knife slamming into the machine's exposed joint. Sparks erupted as the blade struck, and the machine thrashed violently, its remaining legs clawing at the ground. Drew yanked the knife free and struck again, aiming for its head. The second blow sent it collapsing into a heap of twitching metal. He stepped back, breathing hard, and wiped the sweat from his brow. Machine's red eye flickered once before dimming completely. Drew crouched beside it, inspecting the intricate design. Its joints were worn, the plating scratched and dented. This one was older, less advanced, but still deadly. He pried a small glowing cylinder from its chest, studying the faintly pulsating core. It was warm to the touch, its hum weaker now. What the hell are you running on? He muttered to himself, pocketing the core for later study. When Drew returned to the cave, Tyla was waiting at the entrance, her arms crossed. You were gone too long, she said, her voice laced with both concern and irritation. Ran into Drew replied, tossing the glowing core to her. She caught it instinctively, her eyes narrowing as she studied the object. You killed another one, she said, a note of surprise in her voice. They're not invincible, Drew said, stepping past her into the cave. But their persistent. Lyra sat up, rubbing her eyes. What happened? She asked, her voice groggy. Drew killed one of the machines, Taylor said, holding up the core. Another scout. Lyra's eyes Ed. Did it see the cave? No, Drew assured her. The traps worked. Taylor's expression remained grim. They'll keep coming. The more we destroy, the more they'll send. It's only a matter of time. Then we need to stop waiting for them to find us, Drew said, his voice resolute. We need to take the fight to them. Taylor stared at him, incredulous. Are you mad? You want to attack them with what? Your knife and your vines? Drew held her gaze as unflinching. We can't stay here forever. If we don't act, we're sitting ducks. Lyra stood, her small hands balled into fists. I'll help, she said, her voice trembling, but determined. If Drew thinks we can fight, we should. Ta rounded on her daughter. You will do no such thing. You're a child, not soldier. Lyra's glowing eyes burned with defiance. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of being afraid. T's expression faltered, her shoulders slumping. She turned back to Drew, her voice quieter. And what happens when you fail? When more machines come, angrier than before? Drew stepped closer, his voice steady. Then we make sure they regret it. We fight smarter, not harder. We figure out their weaknesses, disrupt their systems, and make this place uninhabitable for them. Taylor sighed, her fingers tightening around the core. You're reckless. I'm alive, Drew said. And so are you. Let's keep it that way for first time. Taylor didn't argue, instead dead. She walked to the corner of the cave where a small pile of scavenged parts lay. She picked up a curved metal shard, inspecting it thoughtfully. If we're going to fight, she said, her voice softer now, Weck need more than traps and knives. Weck need tools, weapons. Drew smiled faintly. Then let's get to work. The night passed, intense preparation. Tyla dismantled glowing core, studying its intricate design, while Drew sharpened his knife and prepared more traps. Lyra and C watched quietly, their wide eyes reflecting the glow of the moss. For the first time since his arrival, Drew felt a flicker of hope. They were no longer just surviving, they were planning, fighting back. As the forest hummed faintly outside, Drew glanced at Ta. You're not as stubborn as you look. She smirked, the first hint of humor he'd seen from her. And you're not as useless as I thought, Drew chuckled, turning back to his work. The shadows of the hunt still loomed, but for now they had a chance. And sometimes a chance was all you needed. Dawn arrived on the planet in muted shades of violet and amber, painting the bioluminescent forest with an otherworldly glow. Drew sat at the edge of the cave, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. Beside him, Ellery crouched on her heels, her golden hair spilling over her shoulders as she worked on weaving another snare. Her small hands moved with surprising precision, her determination quiet but palpable behind them. Taylor tinkered with the salvage machine core. She had spread the parts ACR Ross, a flat rock, using a shard of metal as a makeshift tool to prod at the intricate wires and circuits. Her face was a mask of concentration, her glowing eyes narrowing every so often as she muttered to herself in her native tongue. Kala sat near by, watching her Mother with wide, curious eyes, her tiny hands resting in her lap, the silence was thick, charged with anticipation. Drew finally broke it. Any luck with that thing, he asked, nodding toward the dismantled core. TA didn't look up. It's not a weapon, she said, her tone clipped. It's a power source. The energy it holds is volatile, dangerous. Dangerous is exactly what we need, Drew replied, setting the knife aside. Can you use it against the machines? Tear paused, her fingers hovering over the core. Perhaps if I can manipulate the charge, it might overload their systems, but the energy is unstable. One wrong move, and it will destroy everything within a wide radius. Lyra, up her voice, bright with curiosity, like an explosion. Yes, Tay said, glancing at her daughter, and not the kind you would survive. Drew stood, brushing dirt from his hands. Then we use it as a last resort. Right now we need to keep the machines off our backs long enough to figure out a real plan. Taylor's lips tightened, but she gave a curt nod. I'll see what I can do. The morning passed in careful preparation. Drew Elidilare and Kala outside to reinforce the traps, teaching them how to hide the snares more effectively beneath the glowing foliage. Lyra's enthusiasm hadn't waned since the day before, but Kala was quieter, her small hands trembling as she were. Drew crouched beside her, his voice low and reassuring. You're doing fine, Kala, he said. These traps could save us one day. Kala looked up at him, her wide glowing eyes filled with uncertainty. What if they don't work? They will, Drew said firmly. And if they don't, we'll find another way. That's what surviving means. You keep trying no matter what. Colin nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around the vine. She was weaving. Lyra, watching from a few feet away, gave her sister an encouraging smile. See, you're better at this than me, Lyra said, nudging her. I just tie everything in knots. Kala giggled softly, the sound breaking the tension that had hung over them all morning. The day wore on. Drew ventured deeper into the forest, hoping to find more materials to use for their defenses. The bioluminescent trees towered over him, their translucent trunks casting shifting patterns of light on the ground. He moved cautiously, his knife at the ready, his ears straining for any hint of the machine's telltale hum. The forest felt different today, quieter than usual. Drew couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. His grip tightened on the knife as he scanned the trees, his heart pounding in his chest. Then he heard it, a faint rustling too soft to be machines. He turned sharply, his eyes narrowing as he spotted movement in the shadows. A creature emerged unlike anything he'd seen before. It was small and quadrupedal, its body covered in shimmering scales that reflected the forest's glow, its eyes large and luminous, locked onto him with an intelligence that startled him. The creature didn't move closer. It stood there watching him with a strange mix of curiosity and caution. Drew lowered his knife slightly, his voice low and calm. I'm not here to hurt you, he said, unsure if it could even understand him. The creature tilted its head, its scales rippling with color. It took a cautious step forward, then another, before stopping a few feet away. Drew noticed something strange, a small jagged scar running along its side. It looked like a wound, perhaps from one of the machines. Did they do that to you? He asked softly. The creature didn't respond, but its gaze remained fixed on him. Drew slowly crouched, reaching into his pack to pull out a piece of dried food. He held it out, his movements deliberate. The creature hesitated, then took a step closer. Its nose twitched as it sniffed the air, and finally it snatched the food from his hand. Surprising delicacy, it chewed slowly, its glowing eyes never leaving his face. Drew smiled faintly. Looks like we're both just trying to survive. The creature lingered for a moment before retreating into the shadows, its shimmering form vanishing among the glowing trees. Drew watched it go, a flicker of hope sparking in his chest. If the forest held life beyond the machines, perhaps there was more to this planet than he'd realized. When Drew returned to the cave, Tear was waiting for him, her arms crossed. You were gone too long, she said, her voice sharp. I found something, Drew replied, setting down his pack. A creature, small, covered in scales, looked injured, like it had run into one of the machines. T's expression shifted, her brows furrowing. The forest creatures do not often reveal themselves. They are cautious, smart, Drew said, pulling out the remaining supplies he'd gathered. Smarter than us. Maybe. Lyra ran up to him, her eyes bright with curiosity. Did it glow? She asked. A little, Drew said, smiling. Not as much as you do, Lyra giggled, but TA remained serious. If the creatures are moving closer to us, it could mean the machines are driving them out of their territory. It is not a good sign. Then we'll need to be ready, Drew said, his tone resolute. How's the core coming? Taya gestured toward the rock, where the dismantled parts still lay. It's unstable, but I've created a trigger mechanism. If We plant it and lure the machines to it. It could disable several at once, and if it goes wrong, Drew asked, then we'll have bigger problems, Tear said bluntly. Drew nodded, appreciating her honesty. Let hope it doesn't come to that night the hum returned, louder and more insistent than before. Drew stood at the entrance of the cave, his knife in hand as Tear and the girls huddled in the shadows. Behind him, the traps outside snapped one by one, followed by metallic screeches, and the grinding of gears. Drew stepped out, his heart pounding. A larger machine loomed in the darkness, its red eyes scanning the forest with relentless precision. The traps had slowed it, but it kept moving, its body battered but functional. Now would be a good time for that core, Drew shouted over his shoulder. T appeared at the entrance, holding the glowing core in her hands. She hesitated, her gaze flicking to the girls, then to Drew. If I throw it, we have to run. Do it, Drew said, his voice steady. I'll cover you. Tyla hurled the core toward the machine, the glowing device landing with a faint hiss. The machine turned toward it, its red eyes narrowing. Drew grabbed a rock and hurled it at the machine, drawing it. Attention, come on, he shouted. Over here. The machine lunged toward him, its limbs moving with unnerving speed. Drew dodged, rolling to the side as the core began to pulse. Tear pulled the girls farther into the cave, shielding them with her body. The core detonated, a blinding flash of light and heat that sent Drew sprawling. When the dust settled, the machine lay in pieces, its red eyes extinguished. Drew sat up slowly, coughing against the acrid smoke. Tear emerged from the cave, her face pale but determined. We survived, she said, for now, Drew replied, pulling himself to his feet. But this isn't over. Tear nodded, her gaze hardening. Then we fight smarter together. Drew smiled faintly, the flicker of hope in his chest burning a little brighter. For the first time, they weren't just surviving, they were fighting back. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Drew crouched low behind a tangle of bioluminescent vines, his pulse steady despite the weight of anticipation. Before him loomed the ruins, a massive construct of jagged metal and ancient design. Crimson light pulsed from within, throwing fractured shadows across the surrounding terrain. The hum that emanated from the structure was deep and unrelenting, a constant reminder of the mechanical monstrosities that lay within. Beside him, Tayla knelt, her glowing eyes fixed on the structure. Her jaw was tight, and her hands rested on the scavenging tools they had fashioned into weapons. Lyra and Kala huddled further back, their golden hair catching faint glimmers of the crimson glow. Lyra held a bundle of vines tied into crude snares, her knuckles white as she clutched them. Kala clung to her sister's arm, her wide eyes reflecting both fear and determination. This is madness, Taya whispered, her voice taut. We don't even know what's inside. We know enough, Drew replied, his tone calm but firm. This is where they pair regroup. If we destroy it, we them. Tear shook her head. Or we provoke them. If the machines find us here, they already know we're a threat, Drew interrupted, adjusting the pack on his shoulders. This is our chance to stop waiting and start fighting back. Lyra crawled closer, her small voice breaking the tension. If we destroy it, will they stop hunting us? Drew glanced at her, his expression softening. Maybe not all of them, but it'll make it harder for them to keep coming. It'll buy us time. Tear exhaled sharply, the sound halfway between frustration and resignation. Then let's get this over with. The approach was slow and deliberate. The ruins were surrounded by jagged remnants of the machine's previous incursions, broken limbs, charred plating, and fragments of circuits scattered like macabre breadcrumbs. Drew led the group, his movements precise as he avoided the exposed patches of metal that would betray their footsteps. Every sound seemed amplified, from the faint rustle of vines underfoot to the quiet hum of their breaths. As they neared the entrance, Drew signaled for the group to stop. He pointed to a machine guarding the doorway, its massive form bristling with weaponry. Unlike the smaller scouts they had encountered, this one moved with calculated precision, its red eyes scanning the surroundings in wide arcs. We can't take that head on, Drew murmured, glancing at Tella. We need a distraction. Tella's gaze shifted to Alare, who held the small improvised no-maker Drew had crafted. Without a word, the girl stepped forward, her hands trembling but steady. Drew reached out, stopping her. You sure about this? He asked. Lyra nodded, her chin lifting defiantly. I can do it. Drew hesitated, then released her. Toss it far and as soon as it moves, get back here. Lyra crept to the edge of the foliage, the device cradled in her hands. With a swift motion, she hurled it into the distance. It clattered against the debris, emitting a shrill, piercing tone that echoed through the clearing. The machine froze, its head snapping toward the sound. With a series of sharp clicks, it turned and stalked toward the noise, its red eyes narrowing. Lyra scrambled back to the group, her breath ragged as she ducked behind the vines. Drew motioned for them to move now. Inside the ruins, the air was thick and oppressive, carrying the acrid scent of oil and decay. The walls were lined with conduit, pulsing with red light, their energy casting flickering shadows across the narrow corridors. The hum here was louder, vibrating through the floor with a relentless rhythm. The group moved in silence, their footsteps muffled against the metal grating. Drew took the lead, his knife drawn, while Tear watched their flank. Lyra and Kala stayed close, their eyes darting nervously at every sound. The first chamber they entered was vast, filled with rows of dormant machines. Their sleek, insect-like bodies were lined up in perfect symmetry, each one connected to a glowing conduit by a tangle of wires. Drew's stomach tightened at the sight. This is how they grow their army, he said, his voice low. They're building more. Take expression, darken not for long. Moved quickly, navigating the labyrinthine corridors until they reached the core of the structure. The room was dominated by a massive terminal, its surface covered in glowing symbols that pulsed. Erratically, energy surged through the conduits, converging on a central node that throbbed with power. This is it, Drew said, setting his pack down. He began pulling out the salvage components and tools they had gathered. If we overload this node, it'll trigger a chain reaction. The whole place will go up. Taylor knelt beside him, her fingers brushing the edges of the terminal. It's unstable if you make one mistake. I won't, Drew said, his tone firm. Just keep watch. The hum grew louder as Drew worked, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Sweat dripped down his brow as he connected wires, each spark of energy a reminder of how little room there was for error. T stood guard at the entrance, her glowing eyes scanning the corridor for signs of movement. Lyra and Kala huddled near by, their small hands clutching each other tightly. Kala's voice broke the silence, a soft whisper that barely carried. What if the machines come back? They will, Tear said, her voice steady. But we'll be ready. The words were meant to reassure, but even Tear seemed unconvinced. The tension in the room was palpable, each second stretching longer than the last. Suddenly, the hum shifted its tone, rising to a piercing whine. Taylor turned sharply, her body tense. They're coming. Drew glanced over his shoulder, his expression grim. Just a little longer. The first machine burst into the room, its red eyes blazing. Tear reacted instantly, her body glowing as she raised her hands. A surge of light erupted from her palms, striking the machine and sending it crashing into the wall. More are coming, she shouted, her voice taut with urgency. Drew connected the final wire, the node sparking violently as energy surged through it. It's done, he said, grabbing the detonator. We need to move now. The group sprinted through the corridors as the hum rising to a deafening roar behind them. Machines emerged from every corner, their movements frantic as they tried to stop the intruders. Tia unleashed bursts of light, her attacks precise but draining. Drew used his knife to fend off the smaller machines, his strikes quick and efficient. As they neared the exit, a massive machine blocked their path, its bulk filling the corridor. Drew didn't hesitate. He shoved the detonator into Taylor's hands, his voice urgent. Take the girls and go, he said. I'll hold it off. No, Tala said, her voice breaking. Yauk die. Just go, Drew insisted. You have to protect them. Tell hesitated, her glowing eyes meeting his. Then she nodded, her jaw tightening. Don't take too long. She ushered the girls past the machine, her light creating a shield that deflected its attacks. Drew stayed behind, his knife raised, his body coiled with resolve. The detonator timer ticked down as Drew fought, his movements a blur of desperation and precision. When the final second passed, he threw himself toward the exit, the explosion erupting behind him in a blinding flash of light and heat. Outside, the ruins collapsed in a cascade of fire and metal. The crimson glow extinguished. Tia and the girls stood at the edge of the clearing, their faces streaked with soot and tears. Drew emerged from the wreckage, his body battered but alive. Lyra and Kala ran to him, their small arms wrapping around him tightly. You did it, Tear said, her voice soft but filled with awe. For now, Drew replied, his voice horror. But this isn't over. Tia placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression steady. Then we'll fight together. Drew nodded, a faint smile breaking through the exhaustion. The ruins lay in smoldering ruin behind them, a testament to their first victory. It wasn't the end, but it was a start, and for the first time hope burned brighter than fear. The forest no longer glowed as brightly as before. The explosion had left its mark, with blackened debris scattered among the shimmering foliage. The hum of the machine was gone, replaced by a haunting stillness. Drew sat at the edge of the clearing, his hand resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. His breathing was slow and deliberate, but every muscle in his body etched a constant reminder of how close they had come to death behind him. Tia tended Twara and Kala, who sat huddled together on a patch of moss. The girls were quiet, their usual energy subdued by the weight of what they had just survived. Taze Golden hair shimmered faintly as she leaned over Kala, murmuring soft words in her native tongue. RR. You couldn't hear what she was saying, but the gentle ESS in her tone told him enough. Are they hurt? He asked, his voice low. Taylor glanced up, her glowing eyes meeting his. Just scared, she said. They'll be all right. Drew nodded, exhaling slowly. We bought ourselves some time, that's all we could do. Tear straightened her expression. Sharp time. Isn't enough. You saw what was in those ruins. They won't stop. We've weakened them. Drew said. We've got a chance to plan. Taylor crossed her arms, her gaze hardening. And what will you do when they send more, when their makers come looking for answers? Drew frowned. Makers? TA hesitated, as if she had said too much. She sat down across from him, her voice quieter now. The machines didn't build themselves. They were created for war, as I told you. But their creators, they might still exist. Drew's stomach tightened. If they're out there, why haven't they come back? Maybe they abandoned them, Tala said. Or maybe they waiting for the machines to finish what they started. The implication hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. Drew leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Then we need to find answers. And how do you propose we do that? Tia asked, her tone edged with skepticism. We go to the source. Drew said, his voice steady. We find out where the machines are coming from and stop it. At the rot. Tear stared at him, her expression unreadable. Finally she sighed and shook her head. You're reckless, but maybe recklessness is what we need. The journey began the next morning. Drew led the way, using the map he had pieced together from the ruins' fragmented data. The trail took them deeper into the forest, where the trees grew taller and their bioluminescence dimmed the air. Felt heavier here, thick with an unnatural stillness that made every sound echo louder than it should. Lyra and Kala stayed close to Tila, their small hands clutching the edges of her tunic. Lyra's usual curiosity was tempered by caution, though she occasionally glanced at Drew with questions that never quite made it to her lips. Why is it so quiet? Kala asked softly, her voice barely audible. The machines don't patrol this far, Taylor said. They don't need to. Drew glanced over his shoulder. What's out here that keeps them away? T's gaze shifted to the horizon, the forest itself. It doesn't trust anyone. By midday, the group reached a massive chasm, its jagged edges plunging into darkness. Across the gap, Drew could see another structure. Sleek, alien, and humming faintly with power. This was different from the ruins they had destroyed. This building was alive, its surface pulsating with energy. That's it, Drew said, his voice quiet. Source. Tear frowned. How do you know? Because it's guarded, Drew replied, pointing toward the base of the structure. Machines swarmed the area, their movements precise and methodical, unlike the ones they had fought before. These were larger, more advanced, their metallic bodies gleaming with polished surfaces. We can't fight them all, Tala said. We won't have to, Drew replied. He pulled the salvage device from his pack, the same one Tear had modified to disrupt the machine cores. This is our way in, and if it doesn't work, Tear asked, then we improvise. Drew said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. T shook her head, but there was no anger in her expression this time, only resignation. Crossing the chasm was a challenge. Drew used vines to create a makeshift rope bridge, his movements careful as he secured it to the jagged edges. Once the bridge was complete, he motioned for the others to follow. Lyra went first, her small hands gripping the vines tightly as she moved across. Drew held his breath. She reached the other side, her feet landing safely on the solid ground. Kala followed, her face pale but determined. Ta crossed last, her movement swift and deliberate. Once they were all across, Drew turned toward the structure. Stay here, he said, his voice firm. I'll plant the device. No, Tear said. We go together. Drew hesitated, then nodded. Stay close inside the structure. The air was cold and sterile. The walls were lined with conduits that glowed faintly, their light casting eerie shadows. The hum here was different, more purposeful, as if the building itself was alive. Drew led the way, his knife in hand. Every step was careful, every movement deliberate. The machines patrolled the corridors in precise patterns, their red eyes scanning for intruders. They reached the core chamber without incident. The room was massive, its walls lined with glowing panels that pulsed in rhythmic waves. At the center of the room stood a towering device, its surface covered in intricate designs that seemed to shift and shimmer. This is it, Drew said, pulling the device from his pack. This is what we came for. Tella stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the core. It's beautiful and dangerous. Drew nodded, his hands moving quickly as he set the device in place. Sparks flew as he connected the wires, the hum of the building rising to a crescendo. Suddenly the room shook, alarms blared, their shrill tones cutting through Ere the machines were coming. They know we're here, Tear said, her voice urgent. Just a little longer, Drew replied, his focus unshaken. The first machine burst into the room, its massive form blocking entrance. Tear raised her hands, her body glowing with an intense light. A surge of energy erupted from her palms, slamming into the machine and sending it crashing into the wall. Lyra and Kala huddled behind a console, their faces pale but determined. Lyra's voice was steady as she whispered to her sister, "Stay with me. We'll be okay." Drew connected the final wire, the device sparking violently as it activated. "It's done," he said, turning to the group. "We need to move now." The group sprinted through the corridors, the alarms growing louder with each step. Machen swarmed the building, their movement frantic as they tried to stop the intruders. Taya unleashed bursts of light, her attacks precise but draining. They reached the exit just as the device detonated. A blinding flash of light consumed building, the shockwave sending them tumbling to the ground. When Drew opened his eyes, the structure was gone. Only smoldering ruins remained. The hum finally silenced. Tayla knelt beside him, her face mixture of exhaustion and relief. "You did it," she said. "We did it," Drew replied, his voice hoarse. Liar and Kala ran to him, their small arms wrapping around him tightly for the first time since his arrival on the planet. Drew allowed himself to hope. "It's over," Taylor said softly. "For now," Drew replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "But we're ready for whatever comes next." Together, they stood in the ruins of the machine stronghold, the light of a new dawn breaking through the trees. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was a chance to rebuild, to fight for a future worth living. And for the first time, they believed it was possible.